so this is my sourdough starter. Take a close up of that and you can see some bubbles in there, and that just means that it's doing what it's supposed to. It's fermenting. The edges get kind of gross. I try to keep them scraped down, but then it kind of just gets hard. That's just what it does. So this starter have had about 2 or 3 weeks. I had it in the refrigerator because let me tell you, if you're trying to bake bread right now, flour is at a premium. So anyway, really hard to get. So I had to put my starter in the refrigerator waiting for my flour to come in. So now we're going to go through the recipe. Okay, so now I'm going to melt some coconut oil. About a 1/2 cup is what the recipe calls for. So I'm doing a recipe. So let me just give you a little background. Last time I did this recipe, not sure my starter was mature enough for one thing, and I didn't have the correct oil. So we substituted avocado oil. I'm afraid it made my bread taste a little funny. So I'm hoping by doing the oil that it calls for, which is coconut, and I'm trying to use a good brand. So my coconut oil is organic, expeller pressed, unrefined coconut oil is what our recipe calls for. I really recommend that you look for the USDA organic oils, because if they're not organic, a lot of times they are unrefined, and that is not good for us. So just be real careful when you're buying your oils. It's a place to invest your grocery dollars. Okay, so that's melting on the stove, and while that's melting, I'm going to measure out a cup of my starter. So 1 cup of the sourdough starter. Now you can see what it looks like. It's kind of a batter consistency, kind of like pancake batter. Ooh, and it's sour. And you're going to use a cup of the starter. So I try to make sure I get this. I'm a pretty precise gal when it comes to measurements. So, alright, so we're going to dump that into our bowl. So anyway, last time, what I was telling you guys earlier is that last time I made the bread, there was a couple of things that were different. The other thing that was different is that I did it in the stand mixer. I almost feel like it kneaded the dough too much. It was too rubbery or elastic, and it got no rise. So we're going to see today how this bread turns out. While we're talking about it, let me show you how this bread looked. We actually do have a little piece of it left. So you can see that it's really compact, real tight. It had no rise in it. And the oil, I think, is what made it get dark on the sides. So this is the first experiment. So now we're going to add our flour. Our flour, that rhymes. Alright, so einkorn is what I decided to go with. So I feel like I have a gluten issue, and I struggle if I have too much gluten in my diet. So we're really trying to find alternatives. My understanding about einkorn is it is, this says unbleached and unbromated. Not sure what unbromated means, but anyway, this wheat is an old, ancient grain. So even though it does have gluten in it, it's not the same gluten as today's wheat, and it's not nearly as much. Okay. So now we're going to add we're going to start with 5. That's what happened last time, because it's 6 to 7 cups. So I'm going to go ahead and start adding this in. Now, I will say that for the initial part, a lot of them recommend like a food scale. I don't have one of those. Now I kind of know how my batter is supposed to feel, but that might be something to consider. Is that you can weigh this stuff out and it's a little more precise for baking. So that's 3 cups. Okay, so that's 4 cups. Now I'm going to add some of my other ingredients and decide how much more flour needs to be added. So I'm going to add my melted coconut oil. That was pretty hot. Alright, and to that we're going to add a little bit of salt. And I'm just going to eyeball this. It's a tablespoon. About like that. That's close. And then 1.5 cups of filtered water. So I'm going to add the cup and I'm going to stir it, and then we'll decide how much. It's kind of almost a mystery how much you actually need. So you have to just kind of stir it together until you get the consistency that you're looking for, till your dough comes together. Now this was a really super easy process in the mixer. We'll see how hard it is to self-knead. And that's pretty wet. So what you want is a batter or dough that you can stir and it pulls away from the sides. So I'm going to move this out of the way so I don't knock it in the floor, because that might make me cry. But you can see this is kind of sticky. So that's too sticky. So you want something so that it's not going to be so wet. It's too wet right now. That'd be the way to describe that. So I'm going to dry out my measuring cup. Let me just give you some advice. If you're going to make bread, you need to have more than one measuring cup. But a couple of weeks ago, I dropped my other measuring cup and broke it. So I haven't gotten that replaced. But super important not to have one measuring cup because you're constantly washing and drying. So you need one for dry ingredients and one for wet, ideally. Alright, so this will be 5 cups of flour. We're going to stir that around and see what happens. Now, you'll find a little bit of discrepancy. I've watched several videos about making the sourdough bread, and a lot of them do not recommend a metal spoon. So I've been kind of trying to stay away from that and use my wooden spoon. But then I watched a video where she was totally using that spoon, so I don't know. I guess it'd be something that you just have to experiment with for yourself on that. But I think the wooden spoon's a good idea. Now, I'm going to do another bit of water. Not hardly another half cup. And let's see how that does. As you can see, it's really starting to come together. It's not nearly as sticky. Well, a little bit right there. So I'm probably going to do another cup of flour. And I'm also going to add some honey. Now last time, my family felt like they could really taste the honey. So I'm going to cut back on how much of that I put in. I'm probably going to do, it calls for half a cup in this recipe. So I'm probably going to cut that back by half and just do a 1/4 cup. Now I am going to use my metal spoon to get that out. I thought about just leaving the honey out altogether, but to be honest, every recipe that I've looked at has some kind of sweetener. So I'm not sure how the bread would taste if we didn't have the honey. So I'm kind of afraid to leave that out totally. So we're going to try the honey again with the right oil and see, you know, change just one variable at a time. You kind of figure out what works best. So now we just got to get that incorporated. Now, that's pretty sticky. Okay, so this is my 6 cup of flour going in. I'm going to sprinkle it around and try to get that incorporated. And then I'm going to hand knead this, so I'll need most of the other last cup of flour to kind of help with that process. So we'll see how this does. So let me just tell you, stirring this dough is pretty stiff. So I already did my workout today, but getting a little bit more workout now. So at this point, you can see the dough is pulling away easily from the side of the bowl. So I feel like at this point, I could start getting in there with my hands a little bit. So hand kneading is exactly what it sounds like. I'm going to knead it by hand. So my understanding about kneading is you're just picking up and folding over. So I'm going to look at the clock. It is 7:09. You're supposed to actually knead it for about 15 minutes. So just gently folding over. So here's where we kind of thought that the mixer was a little too much. It kind of was a little, I don't know, it made it too stiff or something. So I'm hoping that that's why it didn't rise. Now, okay, so let me just say this too. Just like the measuring cup, I have one really big bowl. So I'm trying to get some more supplies, and I'll kind of show you what I end up with and maybe give you some recommendations. But I don't have another bowl, so I was kneading in this bowl and needed it to be clean. So now I'm oiling it with coconut oil, and I'll put my dough in there. What I'm going to do is just kind of move the dough around to get coconut oil on all the sides. And we're going to cover that with a tea towel. I think that looks so pretty. And hopefully in the morning when I show you, it will have doubled, is what it's supposed to do, in size. And then we'll finish the process of getting it into the bread pan so that it'll rise again before we actually bake the bread. Revisiting the sourdough. It's been probably 16 hours since we put it into the bowl. It gets this hard crust over it. We kind of scored it to maybe see if that would help it rise. It hasn't risen a lot, but it has risen some. I'm hoping that that's just because my sourdough starter is still awfully young. So what you do now is I take it and kind of mix it all in, kind of fold it together. And then, ooh, it smells good. Wish you could smell it. I'm going to divide it into 2 greased pans. So this makes 2 loaves. And this time we're going to add some heat. So I usually turn my oven on and let it get kind of warm over here at the back of the stove. And I'll cover them again with a tea towel. And we're hoping they're going to rise a little bit. So I'm going to just divide them. And I just kind of go ahead and form them into a loaf, a look of a loaf. And just kind of spread them out. I really smell the coconut oil. I hope that makes a difference in the recipe. The dough feels so nice and soft, and last time it was really dense, so it feels a lot more light. So I'm hoping that makes a difference and helps this rise a little bit. So now what I'll do is let this rise overnight. So this will be ready to try to bake tomorrow. We'll just kind of see if we get a better rise this time. So this is ready to go. We'll cover it with a tea towel, put it on the back of the stove. So we let the dough rise in our pans about 12-14 hours. So this morning early I got up and I baked it off for about 30-35 minutes. It didn't rise a lot. I'm really starting to think from my research that sourdough's not going to get a huge rise unless you do add yeast. And some of the recipes I've looked at do that. But the test is going to be, will it come out of the pan? Because last time that was a big issue. So let's give it a try. Ah, yes. Check it out. But today, thankfully, it popped right out. So you can see it's really thin. It does feel, it's not as dark. So I do think changing the oils and reducing the honey has helped that part. Let's get a knife. Alright. I need a serrated knife. That's something I don't have. It still looks pretty dense. So, I'm not sure. I'm going to need to do some more research, I guess, on that. A lot of the natural homemade breads I've eaten at a local restaurant are very dense like this. So, that may just be how it is. And we just have to accommodate that. But it looks a lot better. So, this second round was much improved from our first round. So, that winds up this experiment on sourdough, and we'll keep you in the loop if we come up with something better. Alright, so that winds up our sourdough. Be sure and subscribe to our channel and click that like button if you enjoy this episode. And check out our other offerings on my blog, simply-thrive.com, for some other recipe ideas and seasonal eating tips.